Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues across the globe. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. President-elect Donald Trump's team is reportedly considering pursuing direct talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in an effort to reduce the risks of an armed conflict. The move would revive the summit diplomacy that marked Trump's first term, including 3 high-profile meetings with Kim, though previous talks failed to produce concrete results on denuclearization. However, some have voiced skepticism about the prospects of a prompt summit under the incoming administration, citing North Korea's significantly advanced nuclear and missile programs, its close alignment with Russia, and more pressing security concerns for the U.S., such as the Russia-Ukraine war. For a deeper analysis of North Korea, we are joined by Dr. Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome, Dr. Go.
Always good to be back.
And also joining us is Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Dongsa University. Great to have you, Professor.
Thank you.
So let's start with our key question, Dr. Go. Do you think North Korean leader Kim Jong-un would also be open to talks with Trump? And if so, do you expect it to happen in the near future?
Well, I think that Kim Jong-un is definitely open to the idea of holding another summit with Donald Trump because in many ways, North Korea, not just Kim Jong-un, but even before him, North Korea's long-standing objective was to sit across the table from a sitting U.S. president and settle the biggest challenge for North Korea, which is to be recognized as a major regional power in this part of the world through the acknowledgement of North Korea as a nuclear state. And from the North Korean perspective, only the United States can do this. No other country can. So Kim Jong-un actually reached tantalizingly close to the objective back in 2018 in Singapore, as well as in 2019 in Hanoi. So I think there's a willingness on the part of Kim Jong-un to take up where both Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump left off back in Hanoi in 2019. But having said that, it doesn't mean that Kim Jong-un is going to reach out to Donald Trump or vice versa and have another summit, say, like in March next year. That's unlikely for now because clearly, as also you pointed out in the introduction, North Korea is quite a different country from where it was back in 2018. It's no longer, it's isolated, but not as isolated it was back in 2018. It's a very important ally in the form of Russia. And also North Korea's nuclear capability is much larger and sophisticated than 6 years ago. So in that sense, I think North Korean leader Kim Jong-un probably believes that he can negotiate with the United States from a position of strength. So that means that North Korea is not going to show its cards right away from the get-go. It's going to wait until President-elect Trump is going to come up with a message revealing what kind of objectives or ultimate goal he has in mind once he restarts this dialogue with Kim Jong-un again. So I think North Korea is going to be deliberately waiting for the opportunity. So Kim Jong-un himself said recently that North Korea and the United States had gone as far as they could back in 2019. So I think this is an indication that North Korea is not in a hurry. So I think it's a way to be seen. But then, but structurally speaking, it's very likely that the two leaders, are going to eventually sit down face to face and try to resolve their differences. But it doesn't mean that it's going to happen right now.
Right, so they could be open for discussions, but not in the near future. Now, Professor Myers, so if the Trump administration moves forward with direct talks, then what kind of key policy objectives should the U.S. prioritize in discussions?
Well, everybody says that North Korea is never going to disarm, it's never going to denuclearize, and I think I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that Trump shouldn't at least aim for denuclearization, just as he did when he went to Hanoi 5 years ago. And that goal does not preclude the possibility of a small action-for-action deal, which would enable Trump to relax U.S. sanctions or provide other benefits to Pyongyang. On the other hand, as Dr. Go just said, Kim Jong-un is in a much stronger position now than he was 5 years ago. So I think he's going to wait and see what Trump and Putin agree on. But even after some kind of agreement between Russia and the United States, I think Kim would be unlikely to offer Trump a better deal than he offered in Hanoi. I think if the two sides want an action-for-action deal, they'll have to make it complex and opaque enough for both Kim and Trump to save face. But it would be unrealistic for Trump to negotiate in the serious hope of getting Kim to make big concessions, because that's just not going to happen. I think even full verification of North Korea's current nuclear arsenal would be asking too much, because Kim is not going to allow foreign inspectors to roam all over the country. His dad didn't want to do that, and he's going to be even less willing to allow that to happen.
So what could the U.S. ask for then?
Well, it's going to probably ask for something bigger than the tiny concession that Kim Jong-un offered in 2019, which was, of course, to shut down the Yongbyon nuclear site. I think he's going to probably ask for at least some limited inspections of North Korea. I don't see how he forgoes even doing that.
Mm-hmm. Now, President-elect Trump has tapped Alex Wong, who has engaged in working-level nuclear talks with North Korea during his first term as his principal deputy national security advisor. What could this signal for Trump's policies on North Korea going forward?
Well, there are several moves that are contained in this appointment. Alex Wong was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indo-Pacific during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. So he wasn't completely focused on North Korea only. He was also focused on Chinese issues. And I mean, because the Indo-Pacific region, and especially the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, has China in mind principally. So Alex Wong is not just a North Korea specialist or experienced North Korea hand. He's an Indo-Pacific expert or policymaker, looking at his background and 4 years ago. So in that sense, I think his portfolio is going to not just include North Korea, but China. And China is a much bigger pressing concern for Donald Trump and for the United States in general. So in that sense, I think it's going to be very visible, obviously, but then at the same time, not just focus on North Korea. And also we have to take into consideration the job description of being a Deputy National Security Advisor. So he's not going to be in charge of a specific policy, even though he has a background in the Pacific strategy and North Korea. His position is essentially going to be an administrator, essentially a clearinghouse for many different issues that's going to come to the White House for the president to handle. So in that sense, I think he'll be essentially administrating different parts of the U.S. government and the different parts of the national security establishment of the Trump administration. So in that sense, I think it's good to have somebody who's experienced in North Korea in a position like that, position of a Deputy National Security Advisor, but doesn't mean that you should redesign as if President-elect Trump intends to restart the dialogue with North Korea right away.
Right, but still he has some deep understanding of North Korea.
Exactly,
right.
yeah.
Now, meanwhile, Dr. Go, North Korea last week held a weapons exhibition showcasing its most recent Hwasong-19 ICBM. Pundits say that the missile could carry multiple warheads. How advanced is North Korea's missile technology up to this point, and how might this impact security dynamics?
So to simply put, we know that North Koreans can now reliably launch their largest ballistic missiles quite well, but then we are not quite sure whether the payload that they carry, the warhead, can land on the target precisely and intact. So this is a big question. So we know it goes up, but we don't know how it goes down. So I think it's a conundrum that North Koreans also face. So in that sense, I think what we have seen is that North Koreans have been showcasing that their ballistic missile technology is getting better, but just mostly in terms of the payload. It's becoming larger, it's more powerful, it can therefore carry much larger warhead. So if North Korea wants to develop a multiple independently entering re-entry vehicle that can carry multiple warheads, as you said, that implies that the warhead is going to be very heavy. So in that sense, North Korea has demonstrated its technical capability to build a rocket that can carry multiple warheads. But whether these warheads can land on target with precision, that's a different question. So I think this is where the Russian assistance or potential Russian assistance comes in. So Russians definitely have the technology. They have the technology that allows these warheads to land on the target precisely. And I think this is technology that North Koreans are very much after. So this is the reason why the international community is very much concerned about the growing coordination and cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang, and especially with the fact that North Koreans are now sending their own soldiers to the battleground in Ukraine, which is very deadly. So there's a increasing suspicion that the payoff or the reward for the North Koreans is probably this technology. So if that's the case, then we'll only know about it in a couple of years when North Korea can finally succeed in demonstrating that they do have a multiple warhead technology.
Right, so let's touch upon Russia's potential assistance to North Korea as we speak in our discussion. But up to this point, Professor Myers, with the showcase, what kind of message do you think North Korea is trying to send by exhibiting this advanced weapons?
Well, as always, I think it has various constituencies in mind. You know, first, the North Korean people, whose main source of pride in their country is the strength of its military. They expect constant displays of progress on that front. Second, of course, Kim wants to show the Americans that the sanctions are as ineffective as ever. He wants to show that he can continue developing advanced weapons even with limited resources. And third, I think he wants to make the South Korean public believe that if they want a different climate on the peninsula, they're going to need to vote for a different kind of president next time. I think the regime's dispatch of troops to Russia has not really helped its standing with any of these three audiences. You know, the North Korean people who've no doubt learned about the dispatch by now are probably thinking that this is not how an autonomous power should behave. The Americans are probably thinking that Kim is desperate for money after all. And I think here South Korean progressives are probably disappointed to see North Korean soldiers serving as cannon fodder for a foreign power. So I think these showcases of advanced weapons are a way of kind of restoring the country's stature somewhat.
Right. Now, speaking of Russia, North Korea and Russia have signed a protocol on enhancing sports exchanges for next year lately. And the North State media said Monday that the two nations have been bolstering cooperation in various fields. Professor, how do you assess the current relationship between North Korea and Russia?
Well, it looks like a very healthy relationship to me. The Western media have a tendency to claim that the so-called authoritarian bloc, you know, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and so on, is fragile and dysfunctional, that the values of the different member states are just too different for them to really cooperate. But I'm afraid this is wishful thinking. You know, the main unifying value is a fear of American expansionism. And I think that fear is strong enough to transcend the strong differences of ideology and interest, which these countries do indeed manifest. The relationship between Russia and North Korea right now is certainly less fragile than the military cooperation between South Korea and Japan, which I think is likely to end with a change of power here. And that authoritarian solidarity may make it harder for Trump to work out the kind of deal with Kim Jong-un that the Americans want.
Right, so ties have been tightened in recent months. Now, according to BBC, citing the Open Source Center satellite imagery, Russia is estimated to have supplied North Korea with more than 1 million barrels of oil since March this year. Now, this is seen as a form of exchange for North Korea's supply of troops to the war. First, Dr. Go, out of all things, why oil? Why is oil such a crucial commodity in exchange?
Well, first of all, I have a personal stake in this article because I was quoted there. And also know both the BBC correspondent here, Jim McKenzie, as well as the team at the Open Source Center that carried out this research. So before going into the details of the investigation, what I can say is that oil is fundamental to the North Korean economy because unlike the perception that people have of North Korea as being basically driven by coal. In fact, it's very much based on petroleum products, gasoline and diesel. So like in any other economy that has to run its modern economic system, they have to secure reliable source and supply of petroleum products into the country. So in general, it is assumed that North Korea requires at the basic level at least 9 million barrels of oil per year. So, but then the United Nations sanctions that are currently in place, in fact, limits North Korea's import of petroleum products, refined oil products such as diesel and gasoline, only to 500,000 barrels of oil per year. And plus, the North Koreans are getting up to 500,000 tons of crude oil from China. We don't know whether it's free, but probably almost free. So that 500,000 tons of crude oil translates to around 4 million barrels of refined oil. So North Korea is right now running on half of what they need to run their modern economic system at the most basic level. So they have to procure the rest from elsewhere. So North Korea used to procure refined oil products in an illegal way through the criminal networks that operate, it's a smuggling network that's based in the South China Sea or East China Sea. And that's the reason why the maritime security has become very important, because all this oil that North Koreans are getting are coming from the fake and also illicit oil tankers operating out of the East China Sea. So now, though, North Koreans are probably getting at least 1 million barrels of oil probably for free from the Russians now, also quid pro quo for the North Korea's military assistance to Russia. But on the other hand, I don't believe this is sufficient reward for the assistance that North Koreans are providing to the Russians. We know that the North Koreans sent at least 20,000 containers worth of munitions. So that's probably around 2 million shells. That's a lot of shells for Russia. Not just that, North Korea sent at least 60 ballistic missiles, KN-23, which is the latest and greatest that North Koreans have. And also North Korea sent howitzers and long-range artillery and rocket systems. So in that sense, I think what North Koreans are getting in return, just in terms of oil, that's not enough. I forgot to mention the 10,000 soldiers that are fighting for the Russians in Ukraine. So the 1 million barrels of oil is probably just essentially a freebie that Vladimir Putin is probably throwing to the mix basket of gifts that the Russians are preparing or giving to the North Koreans right now. So right now, I think the more concern that the experts have outside of North Korea is not about oil that comes from Russia, that's violating the sanctions that are currently in place, but the potential transfer of strategic weapons technology, which is discussed before, such as the re-entry vehicle technology.
Right, so we should be concerned about more of these support coming from Russia. Now, as our Dr. Go just mentioned, this is clearly a violation of UNSC sanctions resolutions against North Korea. Professor Myers, how does this complicate efforts to maintain international sanctions, especially with Russia's veto power?
Well, the sanctions haven't been working all that well anyway. And of course, it's not just oil here. A very strict sanctions regime is supposedly in force in Western countries, but we all saw Kim Jong-un's luxury Maybach car last summer. And according to the recent reports coming out of Ukraine, North Korea's ballistic missile, the KN-23, is virtually bursting with foreign components, foreign circuitry from the United States, from the UK, and so on. And of course, with Russia's veto power in the Security Council, to say nothing of China's, additional sanctions are out of the question. I guess America could finally get tough with secondary boycotts, really punishing countries and companies and banks that are violating sanctions. But I don't think Trump really has the will to do that when he appears to want a much less confrontational relationship with both Moscow and Pyongyang.
Right. And amid this situation, Dr. Go, then are there ways for the U.S. and its allies to enforce these sanctions more effectively, or is this a system of enforcement fundamentally flawed?
Well, it's not fundamentally flawed. It's, in fact, the multilateral sanctions regime that's currently in place. It's actually been been approved by the United Nations Security Council. So it's one of the most legitimate multilateral sanctions regime that can exist. But clearly, as Professor Myers has clearly pointed out, efficacy of this current sanction regime is decaying because China and Russia, they are not really playing a team player here in this case. They're really enforcing sanctions as they should as members of not just the United Nations, but also the permanent members of the Security Council. So the alternative that the international community has put forward is, we have seen this already. The news story came out that 11 countries came together to form the multilateral sanctions monitoring team, which is going to replace the panel of experts that was essentially abolished by the Russian veto earlier this year. So what the intention here is that essentially it's going to be a naming and shaming strategy. So what it means is the international community is going to put the impose political cost on China and Russia for non-enforcing sanctions to the letter. So clearly it's not as good as China and Russia voluntarily enforcing sanctions, but then on the other hand, China and Russia, they have a stake in preserving their influence through their position in the international organizations such as the United Nations. So by pointing out that the China and Russia, they're not living up to their responsibility as a permanent members of the Security Council, that's going to act as a pressure on them. Whether how effective that is going to be remains to be seen. But also, as Professor Myers pointed out, there's another effective mechanism, which is a secondary boycott. So the reason why secondary boycott is effective against China and Russia is because, unlike North Korea, which has almost zero presence in the Western economies, China and Russia, they do depend on their trade with Russia. They depend also from investment flows from the West. Russia less so these days because of the ongoing war in Ukraine, but China definitely does. So I think it's acting as a leverage on China to assist the like-minded states that are enforcing sanctions against North Korea. So in that sense, I believe the sanction regime is still effective, but clearly there are a lot more work we could be doing to make it better. But it doesn't mean that it's not working.
Right, but still efforts need to be done to
Exactly.
better watch the situation. Now, these autocratic regimes' cooperation to help one another achieve what they want is very concerning at this point. Professor Myers, what are the chances that Russia provides technology to North Korea to improve spy satellites and ballistic missiles?
Well, Putin has been following the American news like everybody else, and he knows that Trump is likely to reach out to North Korea at some point, though probably not before he reaches out to Russia. And Putin knows that during the Cold War, North Korea was never a particularly reliable ally of the Soviet Union. So I don't see Putin handing over any really cutting-edge technology to North Korea until he's sure that Kim is going to stay in Russia's corner. On the other hand, as Dr. Go said, North Korea is doing a lot for Russia right now. And I think Kim is unlikely to be content merely with getting oil and money from Moscow. He's going to demand an infusion of Russian know-how into his satellite and missile program. So I would expect some kind of technology transfer. They are military allies after all. But I don't think Putin is going to give Kim any technology that he would really hate to see end up in Chinese hands, let alone in American hands.
All right. Professor Myers and Dr. Go, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We'll have to leave our discussion here. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Always my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.